So you're an American. What kind of American are you? Are you an administrative results American or a managerial outcomes American? My lords and lads, I have just went to the movie theater to observe a piece of cinema. It was one of the movies of all time, and that movie was the Civil War movie. Or Civil War. Is it just Civil War? I've been calling it the Civil War movie. So I'm making this video because we already made like a reaction to the trailer with some hypothesis, maybe some inferences from what we got from what they were showing us with the trailer. And I think a lot of us were interested. I was interested in the movie. I was curious to see what Hollywood could come up with in a scenario that is pretty shitty. And I went, and this is the follow-up to the trailer to give you the final report. So, starting off, spoilers. I am going to spoil the movie. I cannot stress this enough. If you don't want me to spoil the movie for you, stop watching, right? You're never gonna hear a YouTuber say that. But for real, stop watching, because I'm gonna nitpick this movie pretty hard. And I'm gonna give you some massive spoilers.
Oh, that's giving me a clue.
Cannot stress this enough. Okay, now let's dive on in. So, Civil War, as far as an action movie, not that good. As far as like an obscure, different way to observe potential horrors of war at your own doorstep, it was mid, it was good. I think it's a quality film. It's not gonna be like a Saving Private Ryan movie where it's like everyone talks about it all the time. It's gonna be like that movie where give it a few years, but hey, you remember Civil War? Oh yeah, Civil War, yeah, the movie that could have been really good but wasn't. So that's a TLDR. Now, let's really get into the nitpickiness of what I have to say. To set the stage, a civil war has already happened in America, right? We have the American Civil War. Now we're getting the second American Civil War in the modern times. Now, in my head, from what I saw in the movie, a lot of this is taking place almost in a parallel universe, right? It's not necessarily like a one-to-one of our current world. There was no current, like, real-time political figures. There was no, like, real lead-up. Fun fact, though, I did see a gun tuber, technically, in the movie. Shootarugi makes an appearance in the movie. The weapon snatcher himself, the man who became famous during the Seattle riots for a split second during the intro of the movie, shows up. It's like where they're showing all the political strife and he shows up with his Glock and he's like, give me that. That happens. That was pretty neat. So a gun tuber has made it big time in cinema. Congrats, Shootarugi, you made it, buddy. Now, when you think of a civil war, a lot goes into it to make one happen. Now, what would make one happen in modern times? You really have to ask that question. How would it play out? What would it look like? What were the pieces that would come into play? What would be the reason for such great political division? And thanks to this video's sponsor, you get to wargame an American Civil War. Wow! You may have a real-time strategy game of America's Civil War as a snack. Conflict of Nations is a free PvP strategy game. You can choose a real nation to lead during World War III, or in this case, you can play out a modern American Civil War. You can fight up to 128 real players in games that may take weeks to complete. You can use many different units to build out your army. Tanks, jets, nuclear submarines. Mr. President, I have the nuclear football. You can declare war on your neighbors or form new alliances. The War of Northern Aggression. So you can choose your own strategy and engage in epic battles around the world, or on the home front with a civil war. You can play with both the same account on PC and mobile. That's pretty nice for crossplay. And thanks to Conflict of Nations for sponsoring this video. If you click on the link in the description down below, you will actually get a gift. You'll get 13,000 gold coins and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Offer only available for 30 days, so don't lose any time. So technically this video has been months in the making since we reacted to the trailer when it first dropped. In the gun space that I claimed to be in, there was a lot of mixed feelings and hype about it. Definitely some memes that came from the trailer itself. And then finally getting to go see it, I would say save your money until it comes out on a streaming platform if you really want to watch it. It's, to me, as far as a movie-going experience, it's not like going to see Dune 2 in the IMAX. I literally just came from the IMAX and watched it there, and I was like, oh, I mean, it's a quality film. I mean, it's well shot. So now the movie is all shown through the perspective of Mary Jane Watson from Spider-Man. So we get her perspective as a journalist. Also, we get the perspective of a journalist, Pablo Escobar, and then the Syntat from Dune. And then there's some random girl that kind of tags along in there. Those are the four main characters. We're not getting the perspective from soldiers fighting, and this is a massive bummer because a lot of the marketing I think that went into this movie was from the perspective of like, this is a crazy action movie. Like they really tried to market it like, I feel like this is an action movie, otherwise it's not gonna do good. And I'm here to spoil it. It's not really an action movie. It's like journalists following action, and there's some action that takes place. The action itself, not that impressive. I saw a targeted ad on Instagram where it was shown to me, they're showing like some of the cool scenes in the movie on like the reels, and in the description it was like, the best combat on film ever. Ever? That's a bold claim, Mr. Ad. That's a really bold claim. Saving Private Ryan exists. Black Hawk Down exists. Heat exists. Dare I go on? I watched the Muad'Dib ride Shai Hulud against the Emperor Sardaukar in Dune 2 in the IMAX, and you're willing to claim that this rinky-dink movie, still kind of good, this rinky-dink movie has the best combat action on film? Because I'm going to tell you guys, it did not. A lot of the tactics, a lot of the gear, a lot of the texture, a lot of the pageantry, a lot of the effects weren't that good. Like when I say it's still kind of good, I mean the filming style. Like it doesn't feel like a low budget film. But as a gun guy and as a nerd, when we really like autistically dive into the details, you'll be like, oh yeah, no, a lot of the stuff's really kind of like doesn't make any sense. And I brought Lou Stassel with me to go watch it too for his outside opinion. When we really like dissected what was going on, we're like, that doesn't make any sense. Tactically, this makes no sense. A lot to really break down with the film if I'm going to really spoil it for you guys. So the opening scene, we get Nick Offerman, who's really not in the movie that much besides like the opening, his voice as like radio chats, and at the very end when they kill him. Spoilers, I told you there's gonna be spoilers. So that's kind of a bummer because Nick Offerman's actually a pretty good actor. We all love him as Ron Swanson.
I believe every man or woman has the right to bear arms, but only the same arms that our country's forefathers bore in the 18th century.
So one of the first scenes we get to is in New York. There is the cops and the civilians around a water truck, and the civilians are all like, hey, we want some water. We've been out here for a bit. And then we get the introduction to the journalist showing up. Okay. I'm setting the stage. So New York scene, we have the cops arguing with the civilians, and then Miss Mary Jane Watson is there. She's like photographing everything. So we get our first conflict in New York, right? We have this really attractive blonde girl who essentially does the, I don't know if I can say the word on YouTube. She essentially has an S-vest. She runs up with an American flag and then blows up the crowd. She's like this attractive blonde girl. And that kind of took me out of it because I'm like, hey dude, what blonde girl like that looks good is gonna be like, yes, I will die for the great jihad of this country. It's like, it doesn't happen. Pretty girls like that, a lot of the times, I think they're not wired that way. So that's like the opening of the movie, right? Always a plane. I wonder if they can hear it. After the S-vest scene, there is a bar scene, right? And it's supposed to, I think, contrast the situation where if it was normal society, it would be like this crazy, tragic thing. But in that scenario, it's everyday life. So then we get Mary Jane Watson at a hotel bar where all like these journalists hang out and they're having a really good time. It feels like a really good party is going on and they are enjoying life despite the certain circumstances. And I thought that's an interesting little thing. Like when you're going to the human extremes, a reprieve from horrible reality like that would seem awesome. So it makes sense why they would be enjoying that bar, you know, drinking, hanging out with people, feeling alive, you know, like they made it through another day. I can see that, right? Where you really get to soak in like the high of highs and the low of lows of the human existence and conflict. I was worried in the trailer that they were trying to paint Americans, certain factions of Americans, especially with a Hollywood movie, as being the bad guys. And I think a lot of the symbolism they used for the characters that were the bad guys is not overt. It's like really small details for all like the negative characters where you're like, oh, okay, like there's a theme going on and there's like a slight political undertone. And I will say that the movie doesn't have a lot of balls in that sense.
This movie transcends that and has none of it. It's about all of us, and I'm so grateful for that. I think it's so brilliant.
Where it lacks is committing to the bit for political division. And I think they did this to appeal to as wide of an audience as possible. The really only things I got from the film, and I have a lot of notes, I took a lot of notes. I was literally sitting there in the movie, I was like, oh, this is happening. I am typing the notes down now. The only things I got was the president was on his third term. He disbanded the FBI, which is like, I think a lot of us are like, it's not the worst thing. It's not the worst thing. Oh. This doesn't seem like that. Like I don't know why he wouldn't disband the CIA, but okay. I guess, well, if you try and disband the CIA, you get JFK'd, so. And then he was also killing journalists, which it's like they're trying to make like the journalists like this sacred cow vibe, when it's like, dude, they're just people with cameras trying to tell a narrative, like, oh. And the airstriking of civilians. So, which also, I don't know if that's enough juice to lead to a civil war. And when I say airstriking of civilians, I know you're like, that sounds like enough juice. Well, let me kind of break it down. So if we look at current events going on in the Middle East, there are sides claiming there's airstriking of civilians, or sides claiming that there aren't airstriking of civilians. I have not seen Americans on either side really commit to the bit for civil secession in that sense. So that's what I mean, right? Fill some dots in. So the plot line for the movie is essentially the journalists are looking for like a big crazy story along with the Civil War, right? They have plenty of action they can record, but they want the ultimate story, and that would be interviewing the President of the United States, who, like I said, was killing journalists, so there hasn't been an interview apparently in like over a year. So their plan, Spider-Man Pablo Escobar, is to drive down to DC and interview the president before the war is over. That's essentially the plot line. So on the way there, they stop at a gas station. At the gas station, I got an interesting little detail where there's some armed guys guarding a gas station. Kind of makes sense, like, hey, get some resources, gas. And Mary Jane Watson offers them like, hey, we'll give you $300, and like that money's worthless.
$300 buys you a sandwich. We got ham or cheese.
And then she offers Canadian money. And I thought that was an interesting detail. So if there's a big civil war going on, multiple factions are rising, what happens with American tender, right? What would be the new currency? What would be the exchange? Who backs up what currency? And apparently Canadian currency is what they're using. Kind of weird, okay. I don't know why it's not Dogecoin. Diamond hands, fellas, diamond hands. After the gas scene, we kind of have a lot of slow scenes, just dialogue, talking, driving around, because they're trying to drive from New York down to DC along the East Coast, right? There's like a nighttime scene where they hear gunfire in the distance, and they're like, okay, let's go check it out in the morning. They go check it out. Then we get the Boogaloo Boy shirt scene that I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure that you've seen in the trailer. That's one I've talked about where one of the guys is wearing weird armor. Spoiler, he's still wearing weird armor that's not, I don't think, even like ballistic rated. It's just like a cosmetic looking armor. And this is one of those scenes where tactically I was like, okay, a lot of this stuff isn't making sense after the fact. So I guess I'll call like the presidential forces the feds, and then I'll call like these guys, the Boogaloo Boys, more militia looking guys. So the militia guys, the opening scene is one guy's pinned behind like a thin barricade taking rounds from these guys on a balcony, and everyone's apparently a terrible shot because these guys on the balcony can't smoke this dude behind like this really thin piece of cover. Granted, they're getting kind of suppressed from like another corner, and it's like, okay, how come you guys can't land your hits? Are you this bad? And then one of the guys pops smokes for his guys behind cover. That guy still gets taken down. We do get a really cool from this scene, like applying of first aid, where the guy gets hit and he's like stuffing gauze into the gunshot wound. I was like, okay, that's a cool little detail. And then he has a bright idea of like, all right, we're gonna flank around and get him. So they go through the building and we get the white light scene, which I thought was like, if like to the normies, they're like, oh neat, white light. But to me, I'm like, okay, if you're going to a building, these guys are trying to be stealthy. They're like creeping around being super quiet, and then they get to the top of this, talking too fast. Sorry, Colton. So they're going through the building, being super quiet and stealthy, and then as they get to like a threshold of a door, they pretty much all turn their white lights on. Now, it's dark in the building, and I can see like, okay, it makes sense, but the problem is like they're trying to be stealthy, then they start immediately broadcasting their location with white lights before they clear a threshold. So it's like stuff like that, I was like, and the CQB tactics weren't necessarily like the greatest versus what we would see in other television and TV. Granted, I'm not like a CQB expert in that level of fighting. It's like, well, whatever, I guess it's your prerogative, right? However you want to do it. But if you're the guy with the gun, I guess you'll figure it out. And then they encounter a wounded combatant and they execute him on the spot. Granted, this is another American, right? Let me get to that. And they come out with 3 more masked, black hooded up federal soldiers in multicam, and then they execute that guy with what looks like to be a vehicle mounted M240 Bravo. And this kind of really sparked a lot of questions. So this set the tone for things to come, right? With a level of animosity. And my problem with it is that it wasn't well explained. And what I mean by that, if we look at the World War II conflict in the Pacific with the Americans and the Japanese, when the Japanese would surrender, they wouldn't fully surrender, right? They would try and hide grenades on them, and then they would try and take out 1 or 2 more Americans with them. and that led to a lot of animosity for the Japanese soldiers and how they fought. So a lot of times those guys would be like, oh, they're surrendering? Yeah, fat chance, and smoke them, right? For this instance, it's like Americans on Americans, and it's brutal in that sense, right? If you have a guy where you're like, all right, I know we're on opposite sides, I can clearly see you're out of the fight, we'll render aid and send you off to a prison camp or something like that. There was none of that in this scene. There is just nothing but animosity in this scene and throughout the movie. And to me, it was like, what happened? And they did not explain that well in the movie for leading up to a massive cause. Now, the American Civil War in the 1800s just didn't happen overnight. There was a lot of animosity that led up to it. There was a lot of feelings on both sides of the aisle that eventually boiled up to where they're like, all right, yeah, I'll go fight in line formation with rifles that have minié balls and stand against cannons and risk it all. There was a lot of buildup before you're like, yeah, I'd fight for this to the death. And there was zero explanation of that in the movie. That's probably one of my biggest complaints, because it shows, to me, it was like a lack of committing to a storyline and world building. I'll give them credit, like the scenery of the chaos of the war, like throughout the country is like, okay, yeah, this definitely sets the stage in a certain way, but it was like, what really happened for Americans to be so willing to smoke other Americans ruthlessly? Like, what really went into this to where you're like, you don't feel anything? And there was not an explanation of like maybe how long the war's been going on for, because technically the president's been in for his third term now, so this war started on his third term. Was it 8 years building up to it, and now we're in maybe the final years of his presidential third term? There's not a lot of explanation, so you're kind of left to fill in the gaps, and they left it rather vague, which is kind of frustrating because I really wanted more detail. I wanted more, like, they could have given us subtle hints, right? It was just like, come on, give me something. So there was that. And then even with the 240 Bravo execution of the captured prisoners, to me it felt kind of like, it feels kind of war crimey, but whatever. You know, war crime here, war crime there. It's not a war crime the first time, as a fat electrician says, but whatever. But it didn't make sense. They're like, all right, wait, you have a 240 Bravo, but you didn't use it in that initial gunfight when you guys were kind of getting pinned. Like, you didn't think about maybe drive this thing around the corner a distance away and just start suppressing those combatants that were suppressing you. Like, what? None of this made any sense. Lack of radios and comms. I know maybe electricity could be an issue, but this is like really getting into the detail and the sauce for my gun guys, and I really hope you guys appreciate it. And if you do, feel free to like and subscribe. It means a lot. I don't think YouTube really enjoys what we got going on here, so it does help out with the algorithm gods, and it is a sacrifice to that algorithmic god, so I do appreciate it. Now, fast forwarding after that, they go to like a refugee camp where they're hanging out for the night, just crashing and recovering. And the refugee camp kind of like brings it home, where this isn't just a conflict between men and fighters. It's a conflict that it's going to hit home pretty hard. You know, you think about your women and children that are going to be suffering through this. I even talked about it in the trailer, where it's like, when you're a younger guy, right, you have zero stakes, not much to your name, you are more likely to say, yeah, I'll risk it all, I got nothing to lose, I'll fight. It's why the military recruits so many young guys, right? It's like, hey, you have these militaristic ambitions, you have this, you know, young testosterone, you're like willing to fight and die for a cause. As you get older, as you get a family, you start to think, hey, maybe things falling apart and getting bad isn't so great, especially when you have kids to look after, you know, young children. I just had a baby, and having to think that my baby would have to suffer because of some sort of conflict going on would not be ideal. If anything, I would definitely fight to ensure my family stays safe. I don't know if I want to go out and risk it all for a government to replace another government, but that's neither here nor there. So I am doing a more so hasty recounting of the movie to the parts I thought were more interesting. And now, if I'm being blatantly honest, I think you probably saw the most interesting parts in the trailer of the movie. But that being said, they get to this kind of utopic town where everyone's kind of like, we're just doing our own thing, going about town. It doesn't even look like there's a war going on. It's a scene where that girl's in the storefront, they're like, hey, you know there's a civil war going on? She's like, yeah, we try and stay out of it. It's that scene. And spoiler, that lifestyle is made possible because there's a bunch of dudes in the town armed with guns. There's a scene where Mary Jane Watson and the Syntat from Dune are smoking, and the Syntat's like, you wanna know why this is possible? Like, look up, and there's guys on the roof armed with guns, and it's like, oh yeah, I mean, that makes sense, because if you have something good going on, potentially there could be people that want to loot and take what you have, so you would then have to protect yourself in the absence of the law. So that makes sense, and I think it's a good illustration of like why guns are important. Even if those guys aren't off fighting in the governmental conflict between the states and the feds, I think it's interesting to show, like, with the absence of law and order, it's now upon the individual citizen, and his community to ensure that that law and order remains. So I think that's a fine touch, and we get to look at that. And I kind of like that one. I enjoy that one because I don't know if I personally would identify with leaving my family behind to go fight the feds or fight the state for a cause, unless you're like, I truly believe in it. To me, it's like my family comes first. I would rather look after my family, my community. So there's that. After that scene, they're driving along. There's a lot of driving in the movie.
In some ways, it's a road trip movie.
It's like a driving simulator. Driving along. I was driving. There was a massive civil war. I said, wow, what a civil war. No one knows what a civil war. I said, these people, they've never seen a civil war like this. I said, this is one of the civil wars of all time. Andrew Garland. What's that the director's name? Alex Garland. Wow, this director can really depict the horrors of war on your doorstep. Nobody knows the horrors of war like me. I've seen Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died like a dog.
And now he's gone.
So we get to the scene with the snipers. And the scene with the snipers, I definitely say in the comment section of the trailer, there was a lot of, hey, what's going on here? Like, they're definitely painted up in like pride color flags. And there's no explanation really. Like, it's just two dudes and they're counter sniping someone in a building. And it's kind of, I think, to show the chaos of the situation. And the journalists are like, who are you fighting for? And they're like, we're trying to kill a guy in a building trying to kill us. That's it. There's no explanation of like what side they're on. They're just two dudes counter sniping, someone shooting at them. I will say there's a funny thing in that scene where like they're getting shot at, the shooter in the building, he misses like every shot and the snipers are like, be careful, this guy's a good shot. He missed like every shot. He's not that good of a shot. Moving on, we do finally get to the meme scene of what kind of American are you? And I will say this one was a little bit more shocking, and I think a lot of the tones kind of come out of like, whoa, Hollywood, what are you trying to say here? Because all the bad guys in this scene, they're white dudes, and they're essentially what feels like they're doing is an ethnic cleansing of the local town because they dug a mass grave. And this one, you're like, okay, this is clearly not good behavior. You're like, clearly this is not righteous behavior, right? This is not like, if you're ethnically cleansing people, that's not good guy intentions. So that's one of those scenes where you're like, okay, but they don't say who these guys are fighting for, but they're wearing a multicam uniform, the same uniform of the feds, but it's also the same uniform of like the Western forces, which I will say is another big thing that bothered me. I'm blowing by that scene because it felt racially motivated, and I was like, all right, like Hollywood's doing its thing. So after that scene, we fast forward a bit, we get to the Western Forces camp, you see the military logistics, you see like all of what they have going on, and I will say one thing I found interesting is that they were rocking some different uniforms, like they were doing like the Green Marpat, but a lot of the fighting I also saw of the Western Forces in the climactic battle when they attack DC, they're all wearing multicam, and then all the federal forces are all wearing multicam, and each side looks pretty much the exact same in uniform. And you may think like, okay, well, everyone has multicam in the military, and if the military fractures, and everyone's gonna use multicam. And I was like, I don't think so. I could see the federal forces using multicam, and I could see the states like California and Texas using a different uniform to stand out. Maybe like OD green, maybe something that really is highly contrasted. And even if they do use multicam, they would use maybe some sort of taping armband. If we look at the conflict in Ukraine, it's like you have Russians writing Z's or using red duct tape, and then you have the Ukrainians using like blue and yellow, because a lot of times their camo schemes do look very similar. They're using very similar weapons, so they need to quickly identify who is who, so they use that tape method. And there was none of that in the film, so tactically it probably would have been a nightmare if you're looking at a bunch of guys who you're like, okay, what side are you on? If you've ever done any sort of like force-on-force situation, hell, go to an airsoft game or go to an airsoft event. If you're fighting guys that all have similar rifles, and if they have the exact same camo, you have no idea what team they're on. Even under nods, you're gonna be like, who do you fight for? How do you figure that out? So we do get the final assault on DC. Both sides are both wearing very similar uniforms. The tactics are atrocious. The entire city of DC has lights on, which doesn't make any sense. Like, it's illuminated up. And I was like, well, how, if power is a concern, or if there's a war going on, is there all these lights? And why would you want lights on? Would it be better to have lights off? Because in my head, I think the lights would have been off. Like the power grid would have been messed up or bombed or something like that. And then there was a very high lack of night vision throughout the entire movie, and other certain tactical gear like frag grenades. So if the city was off, like where's all the soldiers' night vision? That could have been a cool detail, but they're kind of like speed running through the final assault. That being said, a lot of the federal forces surrendered, and apparently it was just like the last true believers, and then it was just the President's Secret Service. So it makes sense why it would have been a quicker fight, but it was still kind of like, lame. And this is where the pageantry of it all, like the world building, I think really kind of let me down, and the tactics was the final battle. There's a scene where the Western forces are fighting some Federals at like an intersection, and then an Apache comes like almost probably 30 yards above the infantry into the city, surrounded by high buildings to shoot at the guys inside of the buildings as support, a Western Forces Apache. And I think he even had like the wrong machine gun on the platform for the fire rate, because I think those are like a 30mm chain gun. I want to say the sound's like a sound. Not like a minigun, because it was doing a minigun burst for an Apache attack helicopter. Which I was like, that doesn't seem right based off of the live leak videos of thermal I've seen. And then it fired Hellfire missiles pretty much like 50 yards away from it, and then it flew up. And then an Abrams tank comes up and it's like, wait, why would an Apache risk coming super low into a city to fire pretty much at point blank, especially with the Hellfires, all while an Abrams is also rolling up? Like an Abrams could roll up to that and be like, okay, HE left, HE right, everyone's dead, proceed. Like, what? They're like, the more I thought about it, the more I got mad. And it's like, I'm not even like a military professional. I'm like a historical professional. I'm very much an amateur, but I was still like, what the heck, dude? Like, this seems pretty obvious, because there's this thing called danger close.
Boogaloo bad guys between the tree line and my smoke!
Where, depending on the ordinance, something may be considered danger close. So if you're firing a Hellfire, that seemed very danger close. Like, it's literally a city intersection, so it's all within 100 yards of each other, and they're like, nah, cool, pff, Hellfire. The movie looks good. It's pretty dog shit. Okay, so then they get to the front gates of the White House, where President Ron Swanson, the tyrant of America, is. The Western forces of Texas and California move in on his corrupt ass. And this is where things also get weird. So there's like a guard gate tower out front of the gate, and then there's like another barricade. And it only seems like there's 2 federal forces out front defending, and they're still giving those guys a hard time. Eventually they overtake it and they breach the gate, and then something weird happens. We start to get glimpses of the Secret Service, and the Secret Service are wearing suits and they're using MP5Ks. Okay. Now, if you're wondering, hey, why does this make you so upset? Well, in this situation, right, if let's say you are a diehard supporter of President Swanson, and you know that this is gonna be the last battle, you're going down with the ship, you think you're gonna wear a suit and use an MP5K for the last battle when dudes are rolling up in full military kit with saws, M4s, javelins? Now, you think that's really gonna be the case? People don't realize, like, the Secret Service is pretty kitted out. Like, there are guys that are certified in the Secret Service to jump with the president in the nuclear football, like tandem jump, like skydive. Their kit is really good. So for them to be rolling out with like suits and MP5Ks seems like a very gross diagnosis of this situation. Like, that's like normal PSD, like personal security detail, like a get up.
I was ready for him, but it's much easier if the cops do it. Don't we agree?
And why this kind of upset me is I was expecting, like, okay, if you have this American tyrant, maybe they're gonna do like a cool Battle of Berlin, like Reichstag battle, where you have the diehard true believer fanatics holding out to the last line. And it really wasn't that. Like, you don't get any, yet again, cool pageantry. I was hoping like maybe the feds had cooler uniforms. I was hoping the Secret Service would come out swinging and really give these guys a hard run for their money. They essentially all get mobbed over. One weird thing did happen where the presidential motorcade got loaded up and they left the same exact gate that got breached where all the soldiers were, and they all got messed up. I'm sure there had to have been a back entrance otherwhere in that compound, but they decided to use that gate where everyone was at. Made zero sense. They all died. As that motorcade is leaving, Mary Jane Watson sees that and she's like, President Swanson's not in there. So the journalists then take the charge to go into the White House to try and like photograph the president. And the other operators there of the Western forces see it and they're like, come on. So they essentially follow the journalists in there, and they get in there, they're like, stay out of our way. So they start gunfighting more Secret Service inside the White House. They eventually get to President Swanson, and then they execute President Swanson on the spot. So, also Mary Jane Watson dies, if I'm doing spoilers. Pablo Escobar gets a last quote, and the last quote was, "Don't let them shoot me." Now, this was a weird detail. So apparently the Western forces in the movie were issued kill orders for the standing president. Now, to me, this is weird because even in Iraq, with a dictator like Saddam Hussein, who was a pretty brutal dictator, American forces didn't kill him on the spot. So for your own countrymen, why would you kill him on the spot and not have some sort of trial, right? Based off our beliefs, everyone was innocent until proven guilty with due process. So I thought that was interesting, and it kind of ties back into the topic of what the hell happened that led up to a second American Civil War that just got blown over in details in this movie. And now another thing about this is, why would you storm? Okay, so if you have the orders and you had the mindset of, you know the president is in the White House, and you have confirmation, everyone knows it, and the plan is to go in there and fight them. Tactically, why would you even send troops in there if you know you're going to kill them? If you know you're going to kill not only the Secret Service in there, but also the President Swanson in there as well. Why don't you just drop like a JDAM on it with jets? Doesn't make any sense. Like, why don't you just start bombing that city? It's like, okay, we can rebuild DC. That one didn't make any sense to me. That was kind of like so you're just sending troops in for a climactic final battle. I get it, it would be really boring just to drop a bomb on them, but it would be more efficient. Like another chink in the armor, I think. Now, ultimately, yet again, I think the movie shot really well. It looks really good. A24 has a good aesthetic. All their movies look pretty solid. The problem is that this movie, to me, for what I wanted it to be, it did not meet my expectations. I was hoping it would be more conflicty, and all of the action you saw in the trailers is what's in the movie. A lot of the marketing felt deceptive. If you remember the marketing poster of like the troops on top of the Statue of Liberty inside the torch, which in itself doesn't make much sense. Like, what advantage would you have holding a position out there on an island inside the torch of the Statue of Liberty as like an Overwatch position? Mathematically, it's like, even with a long distance rifle, that's still a far shot. So I think if it was marketed as like, okay, this is a more alternate parallel universe of a conflict on the home front through the lens of a journalist, I think I would have let it off the hook more. The problem is that they really tried to, I feel like, market it more action-y, especially like off my algorithm. I was getting way more action-y algorithm marketing based on my end. It felt like Battlefield 5, you know, when everyone was hyped for Battlefield 5, and then we got the trailer with Robot Arm Girl. So it kind of was like, oh, that's like the feeling. You're like, oh, it's still like fun. It's still, you know, entertaining. It was tense. There was a serious tone, but ultimately it was kind of like okay, moving on. Like, I remember watching Dune 2 in the IMAX, and I felt like I melted into my seat. It felt like beautiful cinema. It felt like an experience. This one was just like oh, I saw the movie, okay. So overall, I wanted to make this video as a follow-up to the reaction of the trailer, do a bunch of spoilers for you guys, maybe save you some money if you were on the fence of going to go see it. And I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover while the movie's still pretty fresh in my mind. You know, I will say it is definitely thought-provoking. It's one of those things where you think about worst-case scenarios. As a gun guy, you do think about what could be the worst thing that could happen that you want to prepare for, right? Anywhere from logistical supply chains going down to the Axis powers parachuting into your country, or in this case, a civil war. I hope all of those wouldn't be the case, but if that is such the case, are you prepared? Do you have logistics and infrastructure? Do you have the community behind you to help keep you alive? It is a thought-provoking idea, and I do like it in that sense, so it could wake up more normal people to think, if bad things happen here, am I prepared enough for the bad things? And ultimately, I think at the core of my channel, I do like the idea of not only just making fun, entertaining content, but in some ways helping change people's perspective of, okay, it really is up to me to ensure my own survival. Because at the end of the day, it is. You're not gonna have the rule of law, you're not gonna have some military backing you up. If anything, those things will probably be working against you. So, all in all that to say, right? Big movie breakdown. Wow, this guy can really... And of course, we have to thank again Conflict of Nations for sponsoring this video. It really did work out with a sponsor that has a game that has an American Civil War when we're talking about another American Civil War. Click the link in the description down below for 13,000 gold coins and a month free of a premium subscription. Do not miss out, or it will be your blunder. So click on the link in the description down below and lead your nation to victory. Gentlemen, as always, thank you for watching. Stay easy, stay breezy. I'll catch you on the flip. Oh, I also have new shirts. What kind of American are you? An administrative results American?